Today we will consider the topic, the reward of patience, trusting the process. Our scripture reading, Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. The harvest of patience. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a farmer named Thomas. He was a simple man with a big heart and a deep love for his land. He had inherited his farm from his father and had worked it diligently for years. But as the seasons passed, Thomas found himself at a crossroads. You see, Thomas had always been taught that hard work would yield results, that if you planted good seeds and tended to your crops with care, you would see the fruits of your labor. But that year, something was different. He had planted the same seeds as always: corn, beans, and wheat. He watered the soil, turned it over, and made sure it was rich in nutrients. He worked tirelessly, rising early and working late, ensuring everything was in order. Yet for weeks there was no sign of life. The soil was still, quiet, and barren. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. All around him, other farmers were beginning to see their crops grow. Lush green leaves sprouting from the earth, promising harvests that would bring prosperity. But not for Thomas. Every day he would walk out to his fields, his heart heavy, looking for any sign of growth. The sight of his empty fields began to wear on him. He started doubting himself. Perhaps I've done something wrong, he thought. Maybe the soil is too poor. Maybe my methods are outdated. The whispers of doubt began to fill his mind, and with each passing day, the weight of uncertainty grew heavier. One day, after yet another failed attempt at planting more seeds, Thomas sat on the edge of his field and sighed. His body ached from the relentless work, and his heart was burdened by the lack of progress. Maybe it's time to give up, he whispered to himself. But just as he was about to turn away in defeat, he heard a rustling sound. Curious, he stood up and walked toward the edge of the field. His heart skipped a beat. There, in the rich soil, were tiny green sprouts breaking through the surface, reaching toward the sky. At first, they were small, barely noticeable, but they were there. Growth had begun. Thomas knelt down, brushing his hands gently over the soil. His heart swelled with joy and gratitude. These tiny sprouts were the result of weeks of hard work and patience. He realized in that moment that he had not been wasting his time. No, the growth was happening beneath the surface, even when he couldn't see it. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas continued to care for his crops, but the struggle wasn't over. He had learned that patience was a necessary part of the process, but it didn't make the waiting any easier. Each day brought new challenges. There were days when the weather was unpredictable. Storms would threaten to destroy his crops, and there were days when the sun burned too brightly, drying out the soil. There were also moments of doubt. Sometimes when he looked at the tiny sprouts, he wondered if they would ever grow into strong, tall plants. He could hear the whispers in his mind again, the same ones that had nearly convinced him to give up before. What if it's not enough? What if I'm just wasting my time? But Thomas remembered the words of his father, who had always told him, "Keep doing good even when you don't see the results right away. Trust the process." And so, he pressed on. He worked through the doubts, through the harsh weather, and through the long, lonely days. One day, as Thomas was tending to his crops, a neighbor named William came to visit. William had a large farm with vast fields of crops that were thriving. He had heard about Thomas's struggles and wanted to offer some advice. "Thomas, I've been watching you," William said, "and I admire your dedication. But tell me, why do you keep working so hard when your crops seem to be struggling?" Thomas paused for a moment, looking out at his field. He could feel the weight of the question, but he knew the answer. "William," he said with a soft smile, "I don't see the full picture yet. I don't know when or how, but I believe that if I keep doing what is right, even when I don't see immediate results, I will reap a harvest. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will come." William looked at him thoughtfully and then nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "It's easy to give up when things don't seem to be going our way. But you have something many don't: patience and persistence. Keep at it, Thomas. I believe you'll see the fruits of your labor soon." Weeks passed, and Thomas continued his diligent care of the land. His faith and patience were tested every day, but he refused to give up. Then one bright morning, he noticed something extraordinary. The tiny sprouts had grown into strong, healthy plants. They were tall and vibrant, their leaves waving in the breeze, reaching toward the sky. The corn stalks were thick and strong, the beans were climbing up their supports, and the wheat had turned a brilliant shade of gold. Thomas could hardly believe his eyes. After all the waiting, the hard work, the doubts, and the trials, he was finally seeing the results of his labor. The harvest was coming, and it was more beautiful than he could have imagined. As the weeks went by, Thomas harvested his crops. He was blessed with an abundant yield, more than he had ever hoped for. His fields, once barren and lifeless, had transformed into a sea of growth and bounty. His heart overflowed with gratitude, not just for the harvest, but for the lessons learned along the way. He realized that the harvest wasn't just about the crops, it was about the growth that had taken place within him. He had learned the value of patience, the importance of continuing to do good even when it seemed like there were no results. His faith had been tested, but it had also been strengthened. Thomas stood at the edge of his field, looking out over the vast expanse of crops he had worked so hard to cultivate. His heart was full, and a quiet smile played on his lips. He had learned a valuable lesson, a lesson that had come not from the crops themselves, but from the journey. He knew that sometimes we must wait for the right time, trust the process, and keep doing good even when we can't see the results. As the sun began to set behind the hills, Thomas remembered the words from Galatians 6:9, the scripture that had inspired him all along. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest. He had lived these words, and now he understood them more deeply than ever before. His harvest had come, and it was a reminder that patience, perseverance, and faith would always yield rewards, even when the path seemed uncertain. Final reflection. In life, there are times when we feel like we're working hard, doing good, and staying faithful, but the results seem slow to come. It's easy to become discouraged, to feel like our efforts are in vain. But remember the story of Thomas, the farmer who didn't give up. The harvest didn't come immediately, but when it did, it was abundant and beautiful. In your life, keep planting good seeds, kindness, generosity, love, and faith. Even when you don't see the results right away, keep tending to them. Trust that at the proper time, your harvest will come, and it will be more than worth the wait. Patience brings its rewards. Your harvest is coming.
And it will surprise you what